Karen Martinez stood frozen in her perfectly manicured backyard, her mouth hanging open as she watched the construction crew dig post holes just 20 feet from her back door. The sound of metal hitting earth echoed across what she had always considered her extended property. Her face turned the color of a ripe tomato as she realized the workers were installing fence posts on what she believed was her land. "Stop right there!" she shrieked, her voice carrying across the morning air like fingernails on a chalkboard. "You are trespassing on private property! I am calling the police this instant!" I stepped out from behind the work truck, rolled survey documents tucked under my arm, and walked calmly toward the property line. The morning sun cast long shadows across the disputed ground as I approached the woman who had made my life miserable for the past 8 months. "Actually, Karen," I said, unrolling the official county survey and holding it up for her to see, "this land is mine, has been all along, according to the county records and this certified boundary survey." Her eyes darted between the document and my face, searching for some sign that this was all an elaborate joke. The construction foreman paused his work, waiting for direction as the drama unfolded. Karen's hands trembled as she reached for the survey, but I pulled it back slightly. "This cannot be right," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the distant hum of suburban morning traffic. "My backyard extends to the old oak tree. It always has." The irony was not lost on me. For months, she had insisted that my fence was encroaching on her property. Now she was learning that her entire understanding of where her land ended and mine began was completely backward. Let me take you back to where this all began, because the story of how I ended up reclaiming 15 feet of my own property from an HOA president is one worth telling from the beginning. 18 months earlier, I had finally saved enough money to purchase my dream property. After years of working double shifts at the power plant and living in a cramped apartment in the city, I had scraped together the down payment for 43 acres of beautiful ranch land on the outskirts of Cedar Ridge. The property was perfect, rolling hills dotted with mature oak trees, a small creek running through the northern boundary, and best of all, it was far enough from the city to feel like real country living. The ranch sat adjacent to Willow Creek Estates, a newer subdivision of cookie-cutter homes with perfectly maintained lawns and strictly enforced homeowner association rules. I had specifically chosen property outside any HOA jurisdiction because I wanted the freedom to live my life without some board of busybodies telling me what color I could paint my barn or how tall my grass could grow. The property line between my ranch and the subdivision was clearly marked by an old barbed wire fence that had been there for decades. The previous owner, an elderly rancher named Bill Thompson, had maintained that fence for over 30 years. When I walked the property line during my initial inspection, everything seemed straightforward. The fence was old but sturdy, running in a straight line from the county road all the way back to where my property bordered the state forest. I closed on the ranch in March and spent the first few weeks settling in, unpacking boxes, and getting familiar with my new neighbors. Most of the folks in Willow Creek Estates seemed friendly enough. They would wave when they saw me checking cattle or mending fence. I thought I had found the perfect balance between rural living and suburban convenience. That peaceful coexistence lasted exactly 6 weeks. On a bright Saturday morning in April, I was replacing some rotted fence posts along the back boundary when I heard the distinctive sound of high heels clicking across gravel. I looked up to see a woman in her mid-50s approaching, dressed as if she were heading to a business meeting rather than walking across a ranch pasture. Her blonde hair was styled in a way that probably cost more than I spent on groceries in a month, and her expression suggested she was not coming over to welcome me to the neighborhood. "Excuse me," she called out while still 20 feet away. "I need to speak with you about this fence situation." I set down my post-hole digger and wiped the sweat from my forehead with the back of my work glove. "Good morning, ma'am. I'm Jim Patterson. You must live in one of the houses over there." "I am Karen Martinez, president of the Willow Creek Estates Homeowners Association," she announced, as if the title carried the weight of a royal proclamation. "And we have a serious problem that needs to be addressed immediately." She gestured dramatically toward the fence I had been working on, her perfectly manicured fingernails catching the morning sunlight. "This fence is in the wrong location. It is encroaching on association property by at least 10 feet, and it needs to be moved back to the correct boundary line." I blinked in surprise. looking from Karen to the fence and back again. "Ma'am, I think there might be some confusion here. This fence has been in this exact location for over 30 years. The previous owner maintained it, and all the property surveys show this as the correct boundary." Karen's expression hardened, and I got my first glimpse of the steel beneath her suburban exterior. "I do not care how long that fence has been there. The Homeowners Association has conducted its own property review, and we have determined that your fence is encroaching on our common area. You have 30 days to relocate it to the proper position." She reached into her designer purse and pulled out an official-looking letter on HOA letterhead. The document was typed in formal legal language and demanded that I move my fence back 10 feet from its current position. At the bottom, Karen's signature was accompanied by an official HOA seal that looked impressive but carried absolutely no legal authority over my property. "Mrs. Martinez," I said as politely as I could manage, "I appreciate your concern, but my property is not part of your homeowners association. I specifically purchased land outside the HOA boundaries, and this fence marks the legal property line according to the county records." Karen's face flushed red, and her voice rose to a pitch that probably had dogs howling 3 counties over. "That is absolutely incorrect. The association's boundaries extend to the creek, which means your fence is clearly encroaching on our property. If you do not voluntarily relocate this fence, we will be forced to take legal action." She turned on her heel and marched back toward the subdivision, her heels clicking angrily against the packed earth. I watched her go, feeling a knot of anxiety forming in my stomach. I had dealt with difficult people before, but something about Karen Martinez told me this was not going to be a simple misunderstanding that could be resolved with a friendly conversation. Over the next several weeks, Karen made good on her promise to make my life difficult. Every few days, I would find another letter in my mailbox, sometimes from the HOA, sometimes from lawyers she claimed to represent the association, and occasionally from the county code enforcement office responding to complaints she had filed. The letters escalated in tone and urgency. The first few were formal requests asking me to voluntarily relocate the encroaching fence to restore the proper boundary. When I ignored those, they became demands threatening immediate legal action if I did not comply. By the 6th week, she was sending certified letters claiming that my illegal fence was preventing homeowners from enjoying their rightful access to common areas. The absurdity of the situation was not lost on me. Karen was claiming that residents of Willow Creek Estates needed access to land on my side of the fence, but there was nothing there except pasture grass and a few scattered oak trees. No walking trails, no recreational facilities, nothing that would require access from the subdivision side. I tried to handle the situation diplomatically. I called the county courthouse and requested copies of all the property surveys and boundary records. The documents clearly showed that my fence was located exactly where it should be, running along the legal property line that had been established when the subdivision was originally platted. Armed with the official records, I drove over to Karen's house one evening to try to resolve the dispute face-to-face. Her home was a 2-story colonial with a perfectly manicured front lawn and flower beds that looked like they belonged in a magazine. I rang the doorbell and waited, holding the county survey documents in my hand. Karen opened the door wearing a silk blouse and slacks that probably cost more than most people spent on a week's worth of groceries. Her expression soured the moment she saw me standing on her front porch. "Mrs. Martinez," I began, "I brought copies of the official county property surveys. I think if we look at these together, we can clear up this boundary confusion." She glanced at the documents in my hand, but made no move to invite me inside or examine them more closely. "I am not interested in whatever fabricated paperwork you have brought me. The Homeowners Association has conducted its own survey, and our findings are definitive." "Ma'am, these are not fabricated documents. These are official county records that show the exact location of the property boundaries. Your HOA does not have the authority to override county land records." Karen's voice took on the condescending tone that people use when they think they are explaining something to a child. "Mr. Patterson, perhaps you do not understand how property law works in this county. The Homeowners Association has legal standing to protect the interests of our residents, and that includes ensuring that neighboring properties do not encroach on association land." I tried one more time to reason with her. "Mrs. Martinez, Would you be willing to have an independent surveyor come out and verify the boundary? I will pay for it myself if that would help resolve this situation." Her laugh was sharp and bitter. "That will not be necessary. The association has already retained a qualified surveyor, and his findings confirm that your fence is encroaching on our property. You have 15 days to relocate it, or we will be forced to pursue other remedies." She closed the door firmly, leaving me standing on her porch with the county documents still in my hand. As I walked back to my truck, I noticed several neighbors watching from their windows. Word about the fence dispute had apparently spread throughout the subdivision. True to her word, Karen escalated the situation. 2 weeks later, a surveyor showed up on my property, accompanied by Karen and 2 other people she introduced as association board members. They spent several hours walking the fence line, taking measurements, and driving stakes into the ground. I watched from a distance as they worked, noting that their survey seemed unusually focused on finding evidence to support Karen's position rather than conducting an objective boundary analysis. When they finished, Karen marched over to where I was standing and handed me another official-looking document. "As you can see," she announced triumphantly, "our professional survey confirms that your fence is encroaching on association property by 12 feet, 4 inches. You now have legal notice that you are trespassing on private property belonging to the Willow Creek Estates Homeowners Association." I examined the survey document, noting that it was signed by someone called Peterson Land Services, a company I had never heard of despite having lived in the county for my entire adult life. The methodology section was vague, and the measurements seemed to contradict the established property corners that had been in place for decades. "Mrs. Martinez," I said, keeping my voice as calm as possible, "I would like to have this survey reviewed by an independent professional. There seem to be some discrepancies between your findings and the county records." Karen's smile was cold and predatory. "You are certainly welcome to waste your money on additional surveys, but the facts are clear. This fence is coming down one way or another. If you do not relocate it voluntarily, the association will seek a court order requiring its removal." She turned to leave, then paused and looked back over her shoulder. "Oh, and Mr. Patterson, I should mention that the association is also seeking compensation for the years of lost use caused by your illegal encroachment. We calculate the damages at approximately $8,000. My blood ran cold as the full scope of Karen's plan became clear. She was not just trying to move my fence. She was attempting to extort money from me based on a fraudulent property survey. This had moved far beyond a simple boundary dispute into what felt like outright theft. That evening, I called every surveyor in the county phone book until I found one who could come out the following week. Mitchell County Land Surveying was run by a man named Tom Richardson, who had been doing property surveys in the area for over 20 years. When I explained the situation, he immediately agreed to conduct an independent boundary survey using the original property markers and county records. Tom arrived the following Tuesday morning with equipment that looked far more sophisticated than what Peterson Land Services had used. He spent the better part of 2 days conducting a thorough survey, starting with the original property corners established when the subdivision was first platted, and working his way along the entire boundary. On Thursday afternoon, Tom called me with results that were far more dramatic than I had expected. "Jim," he said, his voice carrying a mixture of amazement and concern, "you need to see this survey in person. Can you meet me at the county courthouse tomorrow morning? We need to file this with the official records, and I think you are going to want to understand exactly what we found." The next morning, I met Tom at the courthouse, where he spread out detailed survey maps across a conference table. The precision of his work was immediately apparent. Every measurement was documented, every property corner verified against the original platting records. "Here is what we discovered," Tom began, pointing to the boundary line marked on his survey. "The fence on your property is not encroaching on association land. In fact, it is located approximately 15 feet inside your actual property boundary." I stared at the survey in disbelief. "Are you saying that my fence is 15 feet onto my own land?" Tom nodded grimly. "Exactly. But here is the really interesting part. The association's fence, the one that marks their backyards, is actually encroaching on your property by nearly the same amount. They have been using land that legally belongs to you for years without permission. The implications hit me like a physical blow. Karen Martinez had spent months accusing me of encroaching on association property, when, in reality, she and her neighbors had been trespassing on my land. The 15-foot strip behind their backyards, the area where several homeowners had built patios, garden sheds, and elaborate landscaping, was actually part of my ranch. "Tom," I said slowly, "what are my legal options here?" He pulled out another set of documents and laid them on the table. "Well, technically you would be within your rights to demand that all the encroaching structures be removed and the land returned to your use. The statute of limitations on adverse possession does not apply here because the encroachment appears to have been based on incorrect survey work rather than a good faith boundary dispute." I studied the survey maps, my mind racing through the possibilities. Karen had been threatening me with legal action for months, sending certified letters and making demands backed by fraudulent survey work. She had accused me of theft, threatened to seek damages, and made my life miserable with constant harassment. Now I held documents proving that she was the one who had been illegally using my property. "Tom, I want you to file this survey with the county and get me certified copies of all the documentation. I also want you to prepare a legal description of the encroached area so I can take appropriate action." He nodded approvingly. "I was hoping you would say that. People like Karen Martinez need to learn that they cannot bully their way into taking other people's property." 3 days later, I received the certified survey documents from the county. Armed with legal proof of the actual property boundaries, I scheduled a meeting with a local attorney who specialized in property disputes. Sarah Coleman had handled several boundary cases in the county and came highly recommended by Tom Richardson. Sarah reviewed the survey documents and the collection of threatening letters I had received from Karen over the past several months. Her expression grew more serious as she worked through the timeline of events. "This is a clear case of property encroachment," she said finally. "The Homeowners Association has been using your land without permission, and their president has been making false claims about the property boundaries. You have several legal remedies available." She outlined my options, ranging from simply demanding that the encroaching structures be removed to seeking monetary damages for the years of unauthorized use. The most straightforward approach would be to give the association formal notice of the boundary violation and demand that they restore the land to its original condition. "However," Sarah added, "given the harassment you have endured and the fraudulent survey they used to support their false claims, you might also consider filing a more comprehensive legal action. Their behavior could constitute intentional interference with your property rights." I thought about Karen's threats, her condescending attitude, and the months of stress she had caused me. The woman had tried to steal my land using fabricated survey documents and intimidation tactics. She had filed false complaints with county offices and threatened me with legal action based on claims she knew were untrue. "Sarah," I said, "I want to reclaim my property, all of it. And I want to do it in a way that makes sure Karen Martinez understands that her bullying tactics have consequences." She smiled grimly. "I think we can arrange that." The legal process moved faster than I had expected. Within 2 weeks, Sarah had prepared all the necessary documents to establish my legal ownership of the disputed land. The county approved my application for a boundary adjustment survey, officially recognizing Tom Richardson's work as the authoritative property description. More importantly, Sarah obtained the permits I would need to install a new fence along the actual property line, a fence that would run directly through several backyards in Willow Creek Estates. On a crisp Monday morning in October, I hired Morrison Construction to begin installing the new boundary fence. The crew arrived at dawn with a truck full of posts, wire, and the heavy equipment needed to dig post holes in the rocky soil. I had not given Karen or the Homeowners Association any advance warning about the fence installation. After months of harassment and threats, I felt no obligation to extend courtesy to people who had shown me none. The legal documents were properly filed, the permits were in order, and the work was being done on my own property. The sound of the post hole digger echoed across the subdivision as Morrison's crew began working their way along the surveyed boundary line. The new fence would run roughly 15 feet behind the existing association fence, cutting through backyards that residents had assumed were entirely their own. I was reviewing the survey maps with the construction foreman when I heard the familiar sound of high heels clicking rapidly across gravel. Karen appeared around the corner of the nearest house, moving faster than I had ever seen her move before. Her face was flushed red with exertion and anger, and her usually perfect hair was disheveled from what must have been a frantic sprint from her house. She was still wearing a silk robe and slippers, suggesting that the sound of construction equipment had woken her from sleep. "What do you think you are doing?" she screamed before she was even within normal conversation distance. "You are trespassing on private property and destroying landscaping that does not belong to you." I folded the survey documents and walked calmly toward the property line where she was standing. The construction crew paused their work, sensing that they were about to witness something more dramatic than a routine fence installation. "Good morning, Karen," I said evenly. "I am installing a fence along my property boundary, as established by the official county survey." She looked frantically at the construction equipment, the freshly dug post holes, and the stakes marking where the new fence would run. The reality of the situation was clearly beginning to dawn on her. "This is impossible," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the morning bird song. "Your property line is at the old fence. It has always been at the old fence." I unrolled the certified survey documents and held them where she could see the official county seal and Tom Richardson's professional signature. "Actually, Karen, your association has been encroaching on my property for years. This fence will restore the correct boundary as established by the original property survey." Her eyes darted between the documents and the construction work, and I could see her mind racing as she tried to process the implications. If the new fence was correctly positioned, it would run directly through her backyard, claiming the area where she had built an expensive patio and garden shed. "This cannot be legal," she said, but her voice lacked the confidence that had characterized her previous threats. "You cannot just decide to move property boundaries without notice." I handed her a copy of the boundary adjustment approval from the county planning office. "I am not moving anything, Karen. I am simply marking the boundary that has always existed according to the legal property description. The same boundary you claimed did not exist when you were demanding that I move my fence." The construction foreman approached us, carrying a copy of the work permit and survey map. "Mr. Patterson, we are ready to start setting posts, but we need to know what to do about the structures that are in the way." Karen's face went pale as she realized what he was talking about. The new fence line would run directly through her garden shed, a structure that had probably cost several $1,000s and contained years' worth of landscaping equipment and seasonal decorations. "You cannot tear down my shed," she said, her voice rising to a shriek. "That shed has been there for 5 years. It is a permanent structure on my property." I looked at the survey map, then at the shed in question. According to Tom Richardson's measurements, the entire structure was located on my side of the actual property line. "Karen, that shed is on my property. It always has been. You built it without permission on land that does not belong to you." She stared at me in disbelief, then at the shed, then back at the survey documents. The mathematical reality was inescapable. The structure she had assumed was safely within her own backyard was actually a trespass on my ranch. "I am calling the police," she announced, pulling her cell phone from her robe pocket. "This is destruction of private property, and I will not stand for it." The construction foreman looked at me questioningly, and I nodded for him to continue working. I had all the legal documentation I needed, and Karen's threats no longer carried any weight. While she spoke frantically into her phone, reporting what she claimed was trespassing and property destruction, the crew continued setting fence posts along the surveyed boundary line. Each post drove home the reality that Karen's understanding of the property boundaries had been completely wrong. 20 minutes later, a county sheriff's deputy arrived at the scene. Deputy Williams was a young man who looked like he had handled plenty of property disputes and domestic disagreements during his time on the force. Karen immediately approached him, speaking rapidly and gesturing dramatically toward the construction work. I could hear fragments of her complaints. Trespassing, property destruction, and illegal fence installation were mentioned repeatedly. Deputy Williams listened patiently to her concerns, then asked to see my permits and survey documents. I handed him the complete file, including Tom Richardson's certified boundary survey, the county's boundary adjustment approval, and the construction permits for the new fence. He spent several minutes reviewing the paperwork, comparing the survey maps to the actual property markers that Tom had flagged during his work. When he finished, he walked over to where Karen was standing and spoke to her in the calm, professional tone that police officers use when delivering unwelcome news. "Ma'am, these documents appear to be in order." Mr. Patterson has the legal right to install a fence along his property boundary, and the county has approved this work based on an official boundary survey. Karen's voice rose to a pitch that probably violated noise ordinances. That survey is wrong. The Homeowners Association conducted its own survey, and it clearly shows that this man is encroaching on our property. Deputy Williams asked to see the association's survey documents. Karen fumbled through her purse and pulled out the report from Peterson Land Services, the same document she had used to threaten me with legal action. The deputy examined the association's survey, comparing it to Tom Richardson's work and the original county property records. After several minutes, he handed the document back to Karen with an expression that suggested he was not impressed with what he had seen. "Ma'am, this survey does not appear to be based on the original property markers or county records. The boundary described here does not match the legal property description on file with the county." Karen's face cycled through several shades of red as the implications of the deputy's words sank in. The survey she had been using to threaten me was not just wrong, it was apparently fraudulent. "That is impossible," she sputtered. "Peterson Land Services is a reputable company. They would not make such a significant error." Deputy Williams shrugged diplomatically. "Ma'am, I cannot comment on the quality of their work, but I can tell you that Mr. Patterson's survey is based on the official property records and has been approved by the county. He has the legal right to install this fence." He turned to the construction crew and nodded for them to continue their work. Karen stood frozen in place, watching helplessly as the fence posts went up along a line that would forever change her understanding of where her property ended and mine began. As the morning progressed, more residents of Willow Creek Estates came out to see what was happening. Word had spread quickly through the subdivision that someone was installing a fence that would cut through several backyards. Most of the neighbors seemed more curious than angry. They gathered in small groups, examining the survey stakes and trying to understand how the property boundaries they had assumed were correct could be so dramatically wrong. Karen, however, was not willing to accept defeat quietly. She spent the rest of the morning making phone calls, presumably to lawyers, county officials, and anyone else she thought might be able to stop the fence installation. By noon, she had managed to get a county code enforcement officer to come out and review the situation. Inspector Janet Torres arrived with a thick file of documents and spent considerable time examining the survey work and construction permits. Karen followed Inspector Torres around the property line, pointing out various landscaping features and structures that would be affected by the new fence. Her voice grew increasingly shrill as she realized that the inspector was not finding any violations in the fence installation. "Inspector Torres," Karen pleaded, "surely there must be some regulation that prevents a property owner from installing a fence that destroys existing structures. I have invested thousands of dollars in landscaping and improvements that will be ruined by this illegal fence." Inspector Torres finished her review and closed her file folder. "Mrs. Martinez, the fence installation appears to comply with all county regulations. Mr. Patterson has the proper permits, and the boundary survey has been approved by the planning department." She paused and looked directly at Karen with an expression that suggested she had dealt with similar situations before. "Ma'am, the fact that you built structures on land that does not belong to you does not give you any legal right to prevent the property owner from using his land." Karen's last hope of official intervention evaporated with Inspector Torres's words. The fence installation would continue, and there was nothing she could do to stop it through official channels. As the afternoon wore on, the new fence began to take shape. The crew worked efficiently, stringing wire between the posts and installing gates where the fence would cross existing pathways. The most dramatic moment came when they reached Karen's garden shed. The structure was clearly located on my side of the surveyed property line, and it would have to be moved or demolished to make room for the fence. Karen stood watching as the construction foreman approached the shed with measuring tools, confirming that the building was indeed encroaching on my property. Her face was a mask of defeat and disbelief as she realized that the shed she had built and maintained for 5 years was about to be removed. "Mrs. Martinez," the foreman called out, "you need to remove any personal property from this building before we can proceed. The structure will have to come down to make room for the fence." She walked slowly toward the shed, her shoulders sagging with the weight of her defeat. For months, she had been the aggressor in this property dispute, making threats and demands backed by fraudulent survey work. Now she was the one losing land and structures to the correct application of property law. I watched from a distance as Karen unlocked the shed and began removing gardening tools, holiday decorations, and other items she had stored there. Each box and bag she carried out was a tangible reminder that her understanding of the property boundaries had been completely wrong. The demolition of the shed took less than an hour. The structure was not particularly substantial, and the construction crew had the tools needed to dismantle it quickly and safely. By late afternoon, nothing remained but a concrete pad and the lingering smell of treated lumber. The patio presented a more complex challenge. Karen had invested considerable money in decorative stonework and landscaping that extended several feet onto my property. The new fence would run directly through the middle of her outdoor entertainment area. "What happens to my patio?" she asked the construction foreman, though her voice suggested she already knew the answer. He consulted the survey map and shook his head. "Ma'am, about half of this patio is on the other side of the property line. You will need to remove the encroaching portion before we can complete the fence installation." Karen stared at the stonework she had probably spent months planning and thousands of dollars installing. The patio had been the centerpiece of her backyard, the place where she entertained guests and enjoyed summer evenings. Now she was learning that she had built it partially on land that had never belonged to her. The sun was setting by the time the construction crew finished installing the new fence. The boundary between my ranch and Willow Creek Estates was now clearly marked by a modern fence that followed the exact property line established by the original county survey. Karen's backyard had shrunk dramatically. The area where she had built her shed was now clearly on my side of the fence, marked as ranch property. The patio was bisected by the new boundary, with roughly half of the stonework now located on my land. But the most dramatic change was to her landscaping. For years, Karen had maintained an elaborate garden that extended well beyond what she had thought was her property line. Flower beds, decorative shrubs, and a small ornamental pond were now clearly located on the ranch side of the fence. The soil in that garden area was rich and well cultivated, the result of years of careful attention and expensive amendments. Karen had unknowingly been improving my land with her gardening efforts, creating valuable agricultural soil that would be perfect for crops. As the construction crew packed up their equipment, Karen made one final attempt to negotiate a resolution. "Mr. Patterson," she called out as I was reviewing the completed fence line, "surely we can work out some kind of arrangement. I have put years of work into that garden area. Perhaps we could agree on some kind of lease arrangement that would allow me to continue maintaining it." I looked at the woman who had spent months threatening me with legal action, demanding that I move my fence and accusing me of stealing her land. She had used fraudulent survey work to support false claims and had made my life miserable with constant harassment. "Karen," I said quietly, "you had 8 months to work out a reasonable arrangement. Instead, you chose to threaten me, lie about property boundaries, and try to steal my land using fake survey documents." Her face flushed red again, but this time with embarrassment rather than anger. She knew that every word I had spoken was true. "The fence stays where it is," I continued. "The land on my side of that fence belongs to me, and I intend to use it." She turned and walked slowly back toward her house, her dreams of maintaining her expanded backyard finally shattered by the reality of actual property boundaries. The following week, Karen listed her house for sale. The real estate listing mentioned property boundary issues as the reason for the quick sale, and the asking price was significantly lower than comparable homes in the subdivision. Word spread quickly through Willow Creek Estates about what had happened with the fence dispute. Several other residents quietly hired their own surveyors to verify their property boundaries, apparently concerned that they might also have been relying on incorrect information about where their land ended. As for me, I now had full use of my property for the first time since I had purchased it. The 15-foot strip that Karen and her neighbors had been using was returned to ranch use, and I had plans for making good use of the rich soil Karen had unknowingly cultivated for me. The garden area she had maintained so carefully was perfect for growing crops. The soil was rich, well-drained, and free of weeds thanks to her years of careful maintenance. I decided to plant corn there, a crop that would grow tall enough to be visible from Karen's former backyard. And just to add a bit of humor to the situation, I installed a small sign at the edge of the former garden area. It read, in letters large enough to be seen from the subdivision, Thanks for the free topsoil, neighbor.